Good evening, and welcome to the Institute of Politics. Great pleasure for me to be the director of this remarkable institute in our efforts to inspire young people to public life. Just a few moments ago, we had a wonderful tribute for David Kearns. Wonderful tributes and presentations, and well-deserved to that remarkable gentleman. Before I introduce Roger, I have to say a few words about the governor. The governor and I, and also secretary, we know that title too, were both elected the same year, 1978. I was elected to the United States Senate. He is governor of South Carolina the same day in that year. 3 months after that came 3 Mile Island, that transient. That's what that was called. It was called a lot worse than that, but transient was the name we used in the technical field. And I didn't know a Zippo lighter from zirconium cladding, but along came the governor of South Carolina while we were working on the low-level nuclear waste compact. And so here he came. He said, "Simpson, nobody seems to understand how to get something moving." And I said, "Well, what should we do here?" He said, "I'll describe it to you, but I won't even draw it on a single sheet of paper." So I listened to this remarkable man, thoughtful, wise, and oh so patient. And we just said, "We'll just do it." And we just cleaned the underbrush and passed it, and nobody knew how the hell it happened. But we did. We did that. And that's what a wonderful gentleman. If any of you are thinking of public life, emulate this man. He is one of the most impressive men I have ever met in public life or ever worked with. And he and Tunky and I cherished our friendship. I dropped the whole load there, didn't I? Pretty good. Now, Roger Porter served for more than a decade in senior economic policy positions in the Ford, Reagan, and Bush White Houses. In the Bush White House, he served as assistant to the president for domestic, economic and domestic policy from 1989 to 93. I can tell you he was directly responsible for the passage of the Clean Air Act with his liaison with the Majority Leader, George Mitchell, and the White House, or it would not have been. I was there. And in the Reagan White House, Mr. Roger served as Deputy Assistant to the President and Director of the White House Office of Policy Development. In the Ford White House, Roger was a White House Fellow from 1974 to 1975. He was appointed Special Assistant to the President and served as Executive Secretary of the President's Economic Policy Board. And he received a BA degree from Brigham Young University, a great rival of the University of Wyoming. I won't go into that any more deeply. It gets rather horrendous. Selected as a Rhodes Scholar and Woodrow Wilson Fellow, received his Bachelor of Philosophy degree from Oxford University, received his MA and PhD degrees from Harvard University. He's taught government and economics at Harvard University and Oxford University and has been on the faculty at Harvard since 1977. Author of 2 books, Presidential Decision Making and the U.S.-USSR Grain Agreement, and numerous other articles and publications. Roger Porter, please. I'll leave you.
Well, thank you, Alan. It's a pleasure to join in welcoming you this evening to this forum event. Tonight's forum is the culmination of a wonderful symposium that we have held today on business and education. Our audience tonight includes a distinguished group of scholars and practitioners from the worlds of business and government and education who have been discussing this subject and who have gathered tonight to honor David Kearns. Today, there's widespread agreement across the political spectrum that excellence in education deserves to be a national priority. And one of those in the vanguard of that effort is our speaker here this evening. Another is the man whom we honor, David Kearns. President Rudenstein wishes he could be here tonight, but has asked me to read the following. I am sorry that I cannot be with all of you this evening to join in tribute to David Kearns. Although I leave tomorrow morning for 10 days in Asia, I did not want to miss the opportunity to share a few thoughts. As most of you know, David Kearns has seen American education from an unusual combination of perspectives, not simply seen it, but worked with exceptional effectiveness to make it stronger. He has brought a deep concern for teaching and learning to each of his many roles, as the CEO of a major corporation, as a senior government official, as a university educator, and as the leader of the New America Schools, as an author, a parent, and a committed citizen. His accomplishments in any one of these roles would be remarkable enough. Together, they represent a level of personal commitment that should inspire all of us who care about education, an example that few of us could hope to match. One essential aspect of that example is David's capacity to bring together different people and different perspectives. Having worn so many hats himself, he has been able to build strong alliances among different sectors of society, business, government, universities, schools, all in pursuit of educational innovation and excellence. Today's symposium, with its broad reach, underscores that quality. So too does the character of David's service at Harvard, where he has helped to rally people from several different faculties around the shared challenge of contributing to constructive change in America's public schools. What David has accomplished is all the more remarkable because of his personal modesty, warmth, and grace. People relish the opportunity to work with him. They know that their time together will be thought-provoking and productive, and that they will enjoy it because of David's humane outlook and because he connects ideas to action. It is true that David Kearns rose to prominence as the leader of a company synonymous with low-cost reproductions. But David himself is a true original, completely irreproducible. He has devoted himself to making education better. And on behalf of his many friends and admirers at Harvard, I offer him our thanks. David? It's a great privilege for me to introduce tonight's forum speaker. For him, the ARCO Forum is familiar territory. Some years ago, I remember an evening when we were panelists together along with Derek Bach discussing the state of education in America. It's a pleasure to have him back. Born in Greenville County, South Carolina, graduate of Furman University and with a law degree from the University of South Carolina, a state representative, a state senator, and governor. Indeed, so successful a chief executive that the South Carolina State Constitution was amended to enable him to run for a second term. Richard Riley left a great and important mark on his home state. But now his eyes are fixed on a farther horizon. Selected by President Clinton in December 1992 to serve as U.S. Secretary of Education, he now has the nation as his audience, and his assignment is to successfully navigate in the policy waters of Washington, D.C., a task even more challenging than when he served as the officer on a U.S. Navy minesweeper. To this challenge, he brings a remarkable array of talents. In an arena filled with distrust and partisanship, with large egos and unapologetic personal ambition, he brings a quiet and self-effacing style, preferring conciliation to confrontation, partnership to partisanship. Those of us who have dealt with him personally echo David Broder's description of him as one of the most decent and honorable people in public life. His character elicits both respect and admiration. His ideas and thoughtful analysis are helping to shape a great national debate. We are honored to have as our speaker this evening, Secretary Richard W. Riley.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Roger, and it's a great honor for me to join with all of you in honoring David Kearns, and I don't know of anything that would have caused me to drive in a rainstorm from Hartford, risking my life and that of half of my staff to be here, but it was all worth it. I thank Alan and Roger for those statements. I've never heard such bipartisan introduction in my life, and it really makes me feel good, and I have such great respect for both of you that I am honored by your statements. It's so good to see my former colleague, if I might be partisan for a moment, Bob Reich. And Bob, we miss you, and I know you look so relaxed and comfortable. I know you miss us. I told somebody coming in I had some good news to tell you all and some bad news. The good news is my son, one of my children, just had my 9th grandchild last week. I'm proud of that. Now, the bad news. The bad news is South Carolina had 4 teams in the NCAA, and they all went out in the first round. And that was, however, my granddaughter, Caroline Drake Riley, far outweighs the bad news. When I think about my grandchildren and all of America's young people, I try to see the 21st century really stretching out before them. What an exciting time to be alive and to be involved in government and certainly in education. And it will be the education century. Because knowledge, as we know, is expanding so rapidly. 1.5 million new web pages created every day. About 32,000 will be created in the time it takes me to deliver this speech. And I don't want you to get worried, my speech isn't all that long. I have President Clinton's cat, Socks, has a web page. This proves one thing, that technology has completely changed our world. You used to need a cat to hunt down a mouse, and now you need a mouse to hunt down the cat. So I look ahead at the world that our young people will live in, this exciting world, and I want to thank David Kearns for what he has done. He's done so much to prepare our nation for this extraordinary challenge that we face in the future. David made a tremendous contribution to the U.S. Department of Education. There's an interesting story that describes, I think, the way that David made his decision to join the department as Deputy Secretary in 1991. The way I heard it, and it was reported in the trade press, President Bush personally called David, asked him to take the job. The president made the call right in the middle of the Gulf War, and David was so honored that the commander-in-chief would take time out from the war to call him that he just had to say yes. So David, I'm so glad that you're here tonight being honored, and I'm pleased at this time we didn't have to have a war to bring you out. David set the U.S. Department of Education on a new and better course. He introduced management techniques of continuous improvement that were so successful at Xerox. Today, the department is a performance-driven organization working to help states and communities to improve education. On a personal level, David is just as impressive. When I worked on President Clinton's transition team, he was kind enough to come and talk to me about education when we were coming in and they were transitioning out. It was a very critical, important time for me, and I'll always be grateful, David, for your wise counsel. Yes, he's a Republican and I'm a Democrat, but David really didn't care about that, for he was into helping improve education. And when it came to America's children and their education, he put partnership ahead of partisanship, and that's exactly the kind of leadership we need in education. And it's a model that I try to emulate. While David was at Xerox, he became one of America's first business leaders to grasp the problems facing us in education and to have the courage to do something about it. He said this: education should not compete with national defense, the trade deficit, drugs, or AIDS. Instead, think of education as a solution to those problems. He called for an end to low expectations and insisted that all children can learn. Nowadays, these ideas are widely accepted. A decade ago, they were fighting words in some places. In his book, Winning the Brain Race, he and Dennis, who's here, David wrote, I took a lot of flack for suggesting that every student should graduate with the core body of knowledge needed to succeed in today's world. Some people insisted that you can't educate everybody. He goes on to say, I find that frightening. Just whom would you leave out? Now, with David's help, our administration has made raising academic standards the bottom line. And this has helped to trigger a national movement for high standards that is now bearing fruit. One state after another is adopting more challenging academic standards and assessments. We have a long way to go, but we are seeing a fundamental change in the very structure of American education. I applaud it. Our children are smarter than we think. David also wrote that making education better takes time, and I agree with him. I believe that as he does, that we must be committed to a steady process of change and continuous improvement, sustained improvement. That's what's hard and that's what's needed. There are some in our nation, however, who expect everything to change overnight. They keep hunting for that instant solution. But I'll tell you, there are no miracle cures in education. David has counseled to stay the course, to focus on what really works in education, like hard work and high standards, and to take those solutions to scale and move them out into the districts and the schools. It takes grit to do that, but David has always had the mettle for the long haul. On the internet, Portland State University is now offering a case study on the total quality management approach that David has championed, and there's a series of questions, each worth 25 points. One question is, how did David Kern's management approach differ from Frank Perdue's? And I can answer that. When it came to education, David didn't chicken out. And for that, I get 25 points and move on. Now, the great task to build on what we've accomplished is there. To do that, we've got to meet a lot of challenges. President Clinton is seeking to build a framework that families and schools and employers and communities can use to make steady progress. First, we must improve early childhood learning. The home, of course, is the most important classroom that a child will ever have. And I've said to every family, spend at least 30 minutes a day reading to your young children or supervising your older children's education. and take note of the scientific research about the way the brain develops in children's early years. Talk and sing to your babies from the day they are born. The lullaby, you see, is the sweet sound of learning. All of us, educators, business people, and community leaders, need to encourage those early acts of parenting and grandparenting. And I'll tell you, if we could do that, 30 minutes a day from every single parent in this country, it would revolutionize education. Second, we must raise the quality of teaching. About 1/3 of the nation's middle school and high school teachers are teaching out of field. Many high school math courses are being taught by teachers who do not even minor in math in college. And we must challenge states and challenge communities to raise teacher certification requirements to require new teachers to demonstrate competence in teaching and to pay them accordingly. Another important innovation in education today is the charter school, something we have been very much involved in and supportive of. I think we need to nourish this very promising development in American education. It really overrides all of these issues and is so important, I think, as an innovative way, a tool for the school district to work with. Now, third, we must reduce class size and give students more individualized attention, including those students with special needs. It's especially important to them. The President has proposed an initiative to help school districts hire 100,000 new qualified teachers over a period of 7 years to reduce the average class size in grades 1 through 3 to 18 across the nation with teachers with special expertise in reading. We propose to pay for this initiative with a comprehensive tobacco bill that will force the tobacco industry to pay hundreds of billions of dollars and to stop marketing their deadly products to kids. We need more teachers and less tobacco in our children's lives. Fourth, we must expand the number of quality after-school programs. Business leaders need to remember that our low unemployment rate has come at a price. More working parents mean more latchkey children, and there are already 5 million. We must give these children safe havens and expanded learning opportunities in reading and the arts, computers, and other fields after school, supervised athletics. And I've challenged business to develop family-friendly policies that allow workers to get more involved in their children's education. These policies help to create a more productive, stable workforce and are good for the bottom line. Fifth, it's time to build, repair, and modernize our nation's stock of school buildings. 60% of all schools need at least one major repair. Many others are overcrowded. Many were built in the days when the Jack Benny radio show was considered high-tech. The President's School Construction Initiative would help states and communities get some 5,000 schools ready for the 21st century. Six, it's time to make sure that every child learns the basics of reading and math and is ready for more advanced learning. The President's proposal for voluntary national tests in 4th grade reading and 8th grade math, including algebra, would help us do this very thing. The American people want national standards of excellence. Many members of Congress, I think, have ignored the people on this issue, and it's time that they caught up. Seventh, we must prepare all children for college, for some post-high school work. It's not a 4-year college for 2-year community college or 1-year technical college, but all children should be thinking about some post-high school work. Today's workers with at least 2 years of college have growing incomes and bright futures. Those who don't are lagging behind. We must urge students to take the tough courses that they'll need to do well in college. And that includes algebra in the 8th grade, it includes geometry by the end of the 9th grade, and chemistry, physics, a second language, and the arts in high school. Low-income students, in particular, need to hear that message. Those who take the courses I just mentioned are 3 times as likely to go to college. The President has a proposal to provide mentors to 1 million disadvantaged middle school children to put them on the road to higher education. Many of these young people have never heard a single adult come to them and say, "Your college material, work hard and prepare yourself." And we need to tell these young people that they're as good as anybody else, and we must expect them to do more and to take tougher courses and to prepare themselves. I'm very pleased to say that the House Education Committee just this week approved the High Hopes for College measure, and that's a bipartisan measure, obviously, since the Democrats are in the minority. But it's President Clinton's first proposal to come out there, and I'll tell you, it's very encouraging to see Democrats and Republicans support something as meaningful as connecting up college students, and all of you, I hope you're listening, connect you up with middle school students and early high school to help them prepare for college. Now, this brings me to a problem that threatens the future, I think, of our economy, and it's called the algebra gap. Only 25% of our 8th graders take algebra. It's a gateway course to more advanced math and computer science. I was at a school over in Hartford, near Hartford, earlier today. Wonderful math class in the 8th grade. Very impressive. 15% of the children in that class take algebra, in that school, take algebra in the 8th grade. And that is something that is a key gateway course. And I think we need to take a look at it. In all developed countries, 100% of the students usually take algebra by the 8th grade. We're paying a heavy price for neglecting math and science. The information technology industry cannot fill hundreds of thousands of job openings. They're out there right now. The performance of the 12th graders in the Third International Math and Science Study, or TIMSS, is a very serious wake-up call. 12th grade performed near the bottom in the study of some 21 nations. And yet, notice that, if you will, America's young people scored at the very top. Our 4th graders were second in the world in science. Only in Korea did they do any higher. That is very interesting. We were way up above average in math, second only to Korea in science, and yet in the middle in the 8th grade, and then dropped towards the bottom in the 12th. 4th graders did very well. That's something we can be proud of, and we need to analyze those numbers and see what it is between the 4th and the 12th grade, and it is largely taking these tough courses, having high expectations, realizing that high standards matter, and following them through all the way through high school. David Kearns was one of the first people in this country who had leadership ability and leadership position to see the connection between the quality of our schools and our international competitiveness. And today, as chairman of the New American Schools Development Corporation, he's helping to create models of comprehensive reform in schools all across the nation. And the president and I are so proud that My department's budget now includes funds to help communities adopt these models of success, and John Anderson here and all of the rest of you who are involved in that effort. New American Schools is doing some of the finest work in our most troubled schools, places where students really have very little hope. And this reminds me of something, and I will close with it. The great author Frank McCourt wrote in his wonderful autobiography, Angela's Ashes. I don't know how many of you have read it, but I recommend it. It's, of course, a bestseller, sold over 2 million hard copies. I had the pleasure of presenting Frank with the Irish American of the Year Award last week in New York. And since this is St. Patrick's Day week, I think it's going to be month next year, and we Irish are spreading it out as far as we can. And since we're so close to Boston, I think it would be appropriate to say a word about Frank in closing. Angela's Ashes, as you know, is his memoir of his very, very difficult days in Limerick, in Ireland, as a young boy, having this enormous recollection of happenings that tear at your heart from line to line, but yet he had this crisp wit and this way of saying things that you would remember it. He's a great teacher. These kids were in the worst kind of poverty that you can imagine. And those of you who read it know they had sores, and they would wake up with enormous fleas in the bed, and hungry when they went to school. And I mean, it was really, really very difficult. And Frank's teacher, Mr. O'Halloran, Frank was in about the 5th grade, and just imagine this class of 5th graders, all of them just that poor, all of them hungry, all of them, as they said in the book, on the dole. None of them were working in a very, very difficult time. And this teacher gets up talking to these very poor children, and he says this: you have to study and learn so that you can make up your own mind about history and everything else. But you can't make up an empty mind. Stock your mind. Stock your mind, he says. It's your house of treasure, and no one in the world can interfere with it. You might be poor, your shoes might be broken, but your mind is a palace. Tonight I want to remember all Americans, and there are lots of them. There's so many heroes and heroines out there who've worked tirelessly to help their fellow citizens build that palace. And the list includes Roger Porter, and it includes Alan Simpson and Bob Reich and Tom Pezant, who worked for me and is now a superintendent here in Boston, and the wonderful people here at the Kennedy School, where I had the great honor of spending a semester. And at the very top of that list is David Kearns, a person who has given millions of children a brighter future, and we honor him because he honored them. Thank you very much.
We all feel richly rewarded for the effort that Secretary Riley made to be with us this evening, and we now turn to the question and answer period in our discussion. You will see a series of microphones strategically placed around the forum. We would appreciate very much if you would identify yourself before asking a brief and concise and understandable question. Why don't we start here? David, you get the first question.
Thank you, sir. name's Rebecca Hardiman. I'm a freshman here at the college, and I was wondering if you could give us your evaluation of the school voucher system.
Well, I thought y'all were going to be a little easier since I was so tired.
Sorry.
I tried to explain to you how worn out I was. Here I am surrounded by all these Republicans. Let me give you my view, and I would be happy to hear yours. I have studied all of the innovations in education for years, seriously. In my judgment, the vouchers using public tax dollars going to private schools is a serious mistake. If you have a school that's not working well and you need to improve it, a failing school, as you hear discussed, I think you ought to take dramatic action to change it, to improve it with a new American schools design or whatever, dramatic changes. If that won't work, close it down. Unfortunately, most failing schools are in the middle of failing communities, and you really have to reach out beyond the school usually and build the whole community back, and it builds the school. Vouchers, to me, though, are not anything but harmful to public schools. In my judgment, it takes resources away from them. State constitutions and state law requires every state in this nation to provide free public education for every child in their state. That's K through 12. That's not higher education. That's a whole different deal. The state responsibility for providing education, and to shift funds off of that to private schools, I think, is a mistake. I think it's harmful to private and parochial schools. I think it's a mistake. It makes them less private, less parochial. We have a lot of programs that help private school students, especially those who are poor or disabled, and I strongly favor that. But having public dollars go to the general operating costs of private schools then all of a sudden makes them accountable to the federal government. We do that in higher education, and that works very well, but that state responsibility is not there for kids after high school. And I've had, since being Secretary of Education, had to close down or turn down well over 700 colleges and universities and schools because they were inadequate. That is a very difficult job. Now, if you think it isn't, you ought to try to start closing down or denying federal Pell Grants and other funds for a school which virtually closes them down. But somebody has to do that. You cannot have money flow out to a school that isn't a school at all. Imagine that then into K through 12. Imagine how confusing that would be to have a school that was no school at all, a private school. That's not what most of them are by far, and we have wonderful, wonderful private and parochial schools. But what if they're not? Who goes in to say this school is no school at all? We're not going to let vouchers go to that school. That's completely foreign to our way of thinking, that the state is responsible for the common school, the public school. That's what's made this country strong. It's the most diverse country in the world. It isn't perfect, but everybody in this country has the opportunity to have an education. I think that is very, very important, and as long as I'm around, I'm going to be doing what I can to fight for better, stronger, quality public schools, and not to shift funds off of the public schools to private schools.
Secretary, my name is David Coughlin. I'm at the Harvard Graduate School of Education down the road there. And coming from the state of Texas, we have a tragic story there about the farmer who spent so much time weighing his cows, he forgot to feed them. And I wonder, in that respect, what role you see for the national standardized voluntary national tests in a city like Boston, where we already plan this year to spend several days of our valuable instructional time with high stakes and high pressure tests like the MCAS and the Stanford Nines.
All right, well, let me talk about that because that's a very good question. It's a good subject. it also is controversial. The voluntary, and note that word, just like voluntary standards, voluntary national tests are just that. And if you have a situation that it doesn't apply or wouldn't be helpful, you, of course, don't have to choose to take it. It's very efficient for the country to develop a test because it is so much more efficient to do it rather than just a state. If you have any of these other standardized tests, normally they guard the items because they use them year after year because they're very, very expensive to develop. What we propose is, you're familiar with the NAEP test and the TIMSS, which I referred to. The TIMSS is an international, as most of you know, I'm sure, math and science test. And the NAEP, of course, is the National Assessment for Education Progress. It's the sample test given in this country in many subjects, so we can tell how the country is doing or how a state is doing in 8th grade science or whatever. They are sample tests. Our test that we propose is simply taking the NAEP test, which is a sample test, and the TIMSS test, and making those things personal. They are now sample tests. If you take, if you're in the 4th grade and you take the NAEP test, you're chosen to take it by sample, scientifically done, you would take about 1/7 of a test. 7 other people would take 1/7, and across the country that comes out as the country's average. What we're doing is taking the 7 parts and putting it where one person can take all 7 parts in an hour and a half. That's the development of it. It's taken linked directly to NAEP and linked directly to TIMSS. Now, why is it not good then for a parent with a child in the 4th grade, when that child should be able to read well and read independently, to know how well that child reads? You say, well, there's other testing out there, and that's a fact. But we're talking about how well that child reads on a national standard, a challenging standard. Louisiana, South Carolina, for example, have tests, reading 4th grade. Those 2 states have the proficient level up in the 70s and 80%. In the NAEP test, they're in 15 to 20%. The tests have been there for years and they're out of date or whatever. People in Louisiana and South Carolina think their kids are reading well, but they are not on a national standard. And I think that this is a wonderful way, a relatively inexpensive way for the country to focus in on reading in the 4th grade. That's the president's goal. Why shouldn't we do that? How do you do it? Well, if you don't test, if you don't have accountability, you don't really find out. You can have all the standards in the world. And the 8th grade, including algebra, again speaks to what I mentioned in my remarks. 100% of the Japanese kids have 8th grade algebra. We have about 30%. All of our kids ought to take algebra in the 8th grade. Well, if you have a national standard and our kids are tested, they're tested now in TIMSS, 8th grade, and they don't do too well. Why? Well, a lot of them aren't taking algebra. You know, and they're not taking geometry, so they're having algebra on the test. I think the voluntary national test makes very good sense. I hope the Congress will pass it. The only thing that worries some of my friends is it sounds so much like a Republican idea. So I have people coming at me from both ends. But I'll tell you this, it makes good sense. It's good for a parent. One of the things people say against it, your concern is a very real one. You say the test's already out there. I say this hour and a half for 4th graders and an hour and a half for 8th graders would be worth it to their parents and to the teacher and to that child. But you hear other complaints about it, but I think it's worthwhile, and I certainly hope the country comes forward with it. And I hope you, as a budding educator, will get supportive.
Mr. Secretary, my name is Hester Fuller. I'm also a student from the Graduate School of Education. It caught my ear when you suggested that one thing we aspire to is that all children should be prepared and encouraged to attend post-secondary education of some sort. It wasn't that long ago that a high school diploma in this country was a pretty good ticket to a reasonably acceptable lifestyle, and I wonder why we shouldn't aspire to that happy state again. Why set our sights low? Why not aspire to a high school education that actually can deliver what it takes to take care of your family in today's world?
Well, that's a good point. The fact is, if you aspire to go to college, you automatically aspire to get a quality high school education. It's folly to think that you're preparing yourself for college in a mediocre high school education. I agree with the tenor of your statement. We should be pressing for quality, high standards in terms of high school graduation, and I favor that in every way in the world. If you look at the numbers out there, I was reading something this week that said that 90% of the jobs in the future jobs, not those that are out there now, are going to require a literacy level in math that exceeds the high school level. Now, that's assuming a good high school education. Now, that's just a fact of life. If you look at earnings, if you look at all of the statistics, those young people who have gone to 1 year of technical college, learning computers or whatever, or 2 years of community college, or certainly 4 years, absolutely in a lifetime, the average is some $600,000+ that a college graduate earns of a lifetime over a high school graduate. So I think the numbers and the changing times are very clear that high school education is very important, a quality high school education, but some post-high school and even after that. What I want people to do is to start thinking different from your approach, like you have a good high school education and you're through. I don't think that's what we should be thinking. I think all of us in this room ought to be thinking education. Alan, you ought to be learning something every day. You ought to be studying. You said you're going home and study Social Security now this morning. But I think all of us really need to think lifelong learning. We hear that said, but I'll tell you it's very, very important, and I think it's meaningful in this day and time for all of us to continue to learn right on.
Sir? Mr. Secretary,
Yeah.
my name is Adam Fagan, and I've been a graduate student for 5 years in the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. In your remarks this evening, one thing that I didn't hear you mention at all is graduate education. And with all the talk about elementary, secondary, and college education, graduate education seems to be off the radar screen. And I was wondering if you could say something about the administration's commitment to graduate education and plans to make sure that it remains a priority.
Well, and I tell you, I had lunch today with the president of Yale and a number of his colleagues, and he would have loved to hear you make that statement. And I heard it in spades from them. And I hear it all along. The president is very interested in educational research and in graduate education. It is when you find advocacy groups out there, and I love them all. I like even people who carry signs around and all. I think these ideas of expressing yourself or caring enough to express yourself, I like. I'm strange that way. But I really do think that graduate students and graduate programs, just by the very nature of them, don't have the big advocacy groups out there. And that's something probably all of us could look at and do something about. Our proposal in the 99 budget of those few narrow graduate programs that we have consolidated into one, really we're proposing an increase from $30 million to $37.5 million. That's still not a whole lot of money, but it is a significant increase. So I am inclined to agree with you and think that we should give more attention to graduate school, and I think it is very, very important. And if you hunt for what makes this country strong, You take the great universities and the great learning, research-oriented learning that takes place there on into graduate school. That is very, very important to the strength of this nation.
Hello, my name is Michael Pasanti, and I'm a junior at the college. And as I'm sure you know, there have been movements in several states lately toward increasing reliance on things like state sales taxes and other methods of funding schools other than property tax-based. And I was wondering what you thought of that movement, and in general, what do you think the best method is of funding our schools?
Well, you're right. There are many questions out there, most of them legal. I remember when I was in the state senate in the 60s, we saw that issue coming up. The property tax for funding education is on its face inequitable. High assessed value, you tax low and get a lot of money out of it. Poor people's property, you have to tax real high and don't get much out of it. And that's very clear and apparent. I thought that case was going to the U.S. Supreme Court, and that they would declare all of these inequitable systems unconstitutional. And the court, Serrano and Rodriguez cases, and sent it back and said it was a state issue, and that every state had to deal with the issue on its own. And I don't disagree with the decision, but then you cause all of these cases to take place in the state Supreme Courts. There are lawsuits in over half the states going on right now, serious lawsuits, some of them very serious. And they are looking at this, the inequity of the tax structure. What I did in South Carolina, we passed an equity measure that caused more money to come into the state and then to be transferred out, including sales tax, and enabling less dependence on the local property tax. We moved state portion up above 60% to about 65%, which is rather high, and not the highest, but it's rather high. So I think any of that, there are a lot of ways to do that. The easier ones is to have more state taxes and then have the state distribute the funds equitably instead of school district taxes. But there are lots of other ways to bring about equity. But that's a very good question, and it's an accurate observation.
My name is Alexander Rossolimo. I'm president of the Center for Security and Social Progress. Mr. Secretary, you emphasized the need to improve education, to teach more math, physics, and chemistry, and you also contrasted the outstanding performance of fourth graders with the poor performance of 12th graders in comparison with other countries. Well, one possible reason for this gap is the fact that high schools in foreign countries often have very high standards, but this also goes hand in hand with a relative high failure rate. For instance, in France, where I went to secondary school, only about 70% graduate with what they call the baccalaureate degree. So my question is, how do you reconcile the goal of improving education with the positive attitude which prevails in this country, which makes it difficult to fail anybody and not to deprive him of a high school diploma?
Well, I favor being very serious about education in those early years. I favored social promotion for years, when especially in many parts of the country we had inequity, unfairness, horrible unfairness in the South for African American children, for example. And I thought we had to go through a period really of helping young people try to acclimate to a changing situation. I think we've reached the point now where it is not good for a child to give them a social promotion. However, if you have a disabled child, they have their own IEP or whatever. But for a normal situation, I think you need to get serious with children early and not wait until they're in the 11th and 12th grade. Let them know early that if they're going to pass, if they're going to move up with their friends, they've got to work hard. If they don't, they're going to have to go to summer school, and they're going to be heavy academics in summer school. Got to get their parents involved in all of those issues. So I favor doing away with social promotion at this time, but having a school system and a school that is designed to help kids pass and not fail. And I think that means you have to have higher expectations of children from very early ages forward. So I see what you're saying. When I finished high school, and that was a long time ago, Alan, we had like a 40% dropout rate in this country. You know, and here now we have like a 12%. And our goal is to get it up to 90% graduation level. And I think that's wonderful. And I think that the nature of this country is such that we have to urge all young people to get a solid education, finish high school, and as I've said earlier, then think on to continue their education, whether it's a technical school or whatever. So I like our system. It's very democratic, if I can use that word, and it's what I think makes this country strong and stable.
Mr. Secretary, my name's Kristen Hudson. I'm a future teacher up here.
Yeah.
I went to Northwestern University and received a liberal arts degree in honors level mathematics. And in the process of getting my certification, I was told I still had to take 5 additional pure mathematics courses in order to become certified to teach high school mathematics. I was also told I had to take 5 other courses. All of this at a great expense to me in order to go into a profession that isn't particularly lucrative. And I wanted to find out how we were going to find 100,000 new people willing to do just what I've been willing to do, and and raise the standards for teachers in this country.
Well, and that's a very good question. As you notice, I said it wasn't in 1 year, but it's over a 7-year period. And I also said that they should be paid professionally. I think this, you have to have teachers who are going to be teaching math in this day and time. Just in this 8th grade class, I'm telling you, they were into high algebra and geometry. And it's very impressive. If any of you have been out and see what goes on in some of these classes, it is serious math. And I was talking to someone from a foreign country recently, and was saying something about how many teachers we have teaching out of field. 55% of our physics teachers, 55% teaching out of field. They weren't physics majors or probably minors. This guy from another country said, what are you talking about, teaching out of field? And I explained it to him. He said, well, we don't have that. We don't have any. It's 0. If a teacher is teaching math in my country, they have to be math graduates, and they are experts in math. And I think you have to look at that. And so I understand the pressure to have someone who is in math, teaching math, have lots of math. I think that's very important. The other parts of your certification I'm not that familiar with. I am familiar with the difficulty in getting young people, recruiting young people into a profession that takes lots of preparation, lots of tough work, lots of long hours, and then the pay is certainly low.
So are you saying that an honors level degree from a reputable university isn't enough math, that we need to still take more?
Well, did you finish in math?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know where.
I'm just questioning the idea of raising the certification standards instead of looking maybe at the process or changing something about the way we think about certification rather than raising the standards.
Well, the way you describe it, it makes pretty good sense to me, but I don't, I don't know the specifics of your certification process or whatever. I like higher certification requirements, and I like higher pay.
Ma'am.
Local decisions.
Mr. Secretary, my name is Lisa Lopez, and I too am a master's student here in the School of Education, and next year I'm going to be a high school history teacher. I too believe that we should have high standards for all students, but my concern is what I see happening is that the standards movement in the history at the high school level is not translating into emphasizing skill building that you say we need for today's modern economy, but are actually translating into covering a breadth of information, content standards, and not allowing to have time to meet the individual needs of each student in the classroom, just because we need to get through all the information in order so those kids can pass tests with high stakes. So I'm wondering how you reconcile what you talk, the need for standards that emphasize skill building versus the content standards, and what do you suggest to a teacher, a future teacher, when they're in that struggle?
Well, I think you're right. It takes both, and it's not just content, but content is very, very important. I strongly believe in a reading study just came out yesterday talking about reading, and it said that reading, you have to have the phonics kind of preparation, you have to have reading comprehension, and then you have to have fluency. And, I think that's true of everything. You have different measures of how you learn various courses. Content has to be a key part of it, but you're right, those other skills are very, very important. I'm afraid I am not expert enough on all of your different certification type issues, and I have a lot of good educators here that I know could help with it, but that is really not my area. Those are local decisions, and they then are supposed to be balanced. We support certification being meaningful, and so you can really have qualified teachers being certified. You have to then look at the need for teachers, the need for recruiting teachers, and all of these issues that you all are facing that are out there in the field. I would welcome hearing from you, and if you do have major problems with the requirements to teach, I would be happy to pull together some people and take a good look at some of that and have you all come in and discuss it with some of our people who are expert in that area.
Our time has flown. We have one last question. Sarah?
Thank you. My name is Sarah Leinbach from the Graduate School of Education. A lot of these education reform issues are becoming complex business. How are journalists doing in educating the public, all those who have an interest, and where would you like to see the focus go? I know that's a...
Well, I have talked a lot about if we are ever going to do what we need to do with education in this country, we've got to really raise the interest of journalists. There's a lot of interest out there, and I think all the polls and everything else show the American people are more interested in education now than ever before, by far, and it really is above all other issues. When you see the different issues listed in the paper of the various polls, I keep talking to journalists and people in the media and saying, listen, that's what people want to hear about. They want to read about education issues. It's like issues these future teachers are talking about. People are interested in that today, a lot more than ever before. You're beginning to see some of the major papers and TV folks really getting more and more into education. When I was coming along, probably the lowest paid person on the staff of most papers was the education beat, and that is beginning to change. But I think it's a statement all of us could make to our friends who are in that field. I went down to meet with the staff of CNN, for example, some months ago, and they had like 20-something people there, and we were supposed to talk for an hour. We ended up talking for 2 hours, and they really got interested in what we were talking about. They assigned somebody and a team of people, and now you see a whole lot more education things on CNN, and I think others who really look at it are getting more interested in it. It's very important for education. Good education articles that make things very clear, that really give people fair look at things and make them think it out, are really helpful to education. So I'm very glad you brought the point up, and it's something I talk about a lot. I think it's one of the chief needs if we're going to get standards in the classroom, if we're going to build education to the level we want to build it. We're going to have competent journalists and media folks really interested, prepared in education writing and presentations. Well, I thank you all very much.
We are extraordinarily grateful to Secretary Riley at the end of a very long day for him for sharing those thoughts with us this evening. Travel safely, and we look forward to seeing you at the next forum.
Well, I thank you.